Excellency, the Vice President of the Gambia, who is also a very strong activist for women's rights, the Vice Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, commissioners, if they are here, and all special guests who are here, and that's all of you. But I also just want to thank women like Mayor Ruth Neto for being here, and for other power women, because I think it's important to link generations. What was done in Pau, what is happening now, and what will happen in the future. And I'm glad also I see a sprinkling of young people in the room. As Lita says, we are about to start the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the formation of the OAU and AU. But as usual, PAU was formed a year before, but its 50th anniversary went quietly, and I think it's still the story of our lives. But slowly and surely, it must change. We then thought that this celebration is looked at in three steps, really, or three phases. One is the actual celebration, which will take place on the 24th and 25th, because on the 24th we thought civil society must also have an opportunity to celebrate. So in the morning there's going to be a youth session with some few heads of state, some former heads of state, and hopefully President Kaunda, linking all the generations of the past 50 years, but linking them with the future generation, because the youth represents the future leaders. And that will take place at the hall where the AU was formed, because according to the plans, there is nothing planned for that hall. And we thought we should still go back to that hall on the 24th, linking the generations, having discussions there between the youth and the older generation. And in the afternoon, of course, there's going to be what we call a People's Parliament. All the organizations who would like to speak and have a message for the 50th would also speak at that. But those messages will also become part of the formal record of the celebrations. Because on the 25th, it's not going to be easy to have everyone get an opportunity. Not even the heads of state will all speak on the 25th. So on the 24th, we'll have that. But there are also different sectors who are also having their own meetings. The Chamber of Commerce, African Chamber, they are meeting, the African editors, and a lot of other sectors. So it's going to be both a celebration of governmental, but also civil society. And the youth will also be having their session before the 25th. So that would be the main celebration. On the 25th, it would be mainly heads of state from the continent and others who are invited from outside the continent. They will discuss the same theme that we are discussing, but they'll also be just celebrations. That's the first phase of that celebration. But as you know, it was agreed that the celebration should take place throughout the year in every country on the continent and in the diaspora, wherever Africans exist or people of African descent, there should be celebrations. And we thought that as part of the year-long celebrations, there must be discussions about our future, because it's good to look back, celebrate our heroes and heroines who brought us here, where we are, learn lessons from the past, but at the same time, focus in the next 50 years. And of course, the past generation did define their strategic mission, and they fulfilled it. As Frank Fanon says, it's our turn to define our own mission. So as part of this celebration through the year, we thought that all sectors should also meet and discuss the past, but more importantly, the future. Where do we want to see Africa in the next 50 years? And that's partly what you yourself here have to discuss. But you are a very small representative of women. What we hope you will do when you get back home is to organize more women and have discussions with them on the same issue. Where do they want to see Africa in the next 50 years? Whether you in politics, in the arts, intellectuals, in the judiciary, every area of human endeavor, where should Africa be? Because the African agenda cannot be defined only by governments. It has to be defined by all of us, inputting also into what government does, but also having our own agenda that is part of the African agenda that we would have all defined. So for us, we put a lot of emphasis on that part of the celebration where Africans in all walks of life, young people, they must tweet, they must say what they want, they must discuss on Facebook, but they must also discuss face-to-face. Everyone must have a say on what they think Africa should be. Because you see, if we don't do that, the narrative for Africa will then come from other people, not from us. And it's very important that the narrative comes from us, the agenda comes from us. And our friends from outside who want to assist us know where do we want to go, where do we want to be assisted, and how do we want to be assisted. That is very critical, because if we don't have a very clear roadmap of where we want to go in the next 60 years, in the next 50 years, people in good faith will come and assist us, but they might take us on a long detour that we didn't want to take. And we might end up even that detour becoming the journey, because we have not defined our own journey. And so it's very critical. It's not to say we're shutting everybody out who wants to work with us. In fact, we are going to welcome them even more, because we would have defined where we want to go to. And I also want to just say, now there's going to be discussions about post-2015. We must make an input into that. But that agenda of 2015 is a world agenda. We must have our own. If it coincides, then it's very good. If it doesn't, because the tendency is sometimes to discuss this post-2015 agenda as though they are discussing the African agenda. It's not our agenda. We will make an input as part of the world citizens into that agenda. but it's important that we have also our own. For instance, if we say in the next 50 years, I think, without preempting the discussion, I think Africa should be prosperous in the next 50 years. We should not be discussed and described as a poor continent. We must be prosperous. Those who are becoming prosperous, some of them were like us. I read somewhere recently that China 30 to 50 years ago was poorer than Malawi. But where is it now? But what did they do? They made up their mind what they want to do, where they want to be. 2020, they want to be moderately prosperous. And definitely they are going to be, because they've set their minds and all their efforts are towards that. I think 2063, Africa, it's possible for Africa to be prosperous. It's possible for Africa to be at peace with itself. So, some people say, oh, that's very bold, or that's very ambitious. I don't think so. I think it's possible, and if we really work towards it, we can achieve it. I know that some people are saying by 2030, we should work in the next 15 years, post-2015 towards 2030, to eradicate extreme poverty. Now, I don't agree with that. For us, it's not, as young people say, it's not cool to be poor. We want to eradicate poverty, not extreme. Because if we define ourselves in that way, that we just want to, the UN can say that, whoever can say that, but as Africans, we cannot say we're just working towards eradicating extreme poverty amongst ourselves. Because said differently, it means we are saying it's fine to be poor, we don't mind to be poor, it's fine, as long as it's not extreme. Is that what we want for our children and for our grandchildren? No. So that's why it's important that we define what we want. And then we go out, and that's our narrative that must go out to the world about Africa. So we don't have documents that we have given you, large volumes of documents, and that's on purpose. Because if you have a document in front of you, you react to what is here in front of you. You stop thinking originally. You want to react to the document. We don't want you to react to anybody's ideas. We want your ideas. So we won't be giving you a document to critique or to, you can read them if you find them, but we want your ideas, because we want those ideas to go into those documents. Because I find, I don't know about other people, but with me, once you give me a document, then my mind tends to concentrate on what is on the document and whether I agree with it or not, and I try to change what is there. Whereas if you say, put something on paper or think about something, then I'm not reacting to anyone, I'm just saying what I think. So it is partly for that reason that you don't have the normal piles of documents that you would receive in a summit, because we just want you to freely give us your ideas. And of course, from the Commission side, we've put some few ideas, but we just want to say, truly, 2063, Africa should be prosperous and at peace with itself. And there are a few things that we'll just flag. the first few things is, what are our assets that can get us to prosperity? And what do we have that can really change and accelerate what is already happening to a point where we can say Africa is modern, it's prosperous, it's at peace with itself. The EU has just received the Nobel Peace Prize because they are now at peace with themselves. They were at war with themselves for a very long time. They caused us 2 world wars. And in fact, Western Europe began to even think seriously and work seriously towards unifying Europe when Germany and France signed the Elysee Treaty. Because when they were still warring, there wasn't going to be peace, there wasn't going to be prosperity and development. So, from the Commission side, we think our most precious asset that can get us to prosperity and peace, our most precious, our most abundant from the Commission side is our people. We must invest in our people. We're more than 1 billion strong now. 2050 is projected will be more than 2 billion strong. Of course, women will always be more than half of that. And even as early as 2025, a quarter of the world's under 25s would be in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're a young population, vibrant, energetic. We must invest in them to unleash their creativity, to unleash their innovation, so that they do not only get decent jobs, but they create jobs. And they drive the development of the continent. And of course, always more than half of those would be women. And those women will always be producing the others as well. So women must also play a critical role in that. Of course, our land, agriculture, we think is also can be one of those drivers for prosperity. Africa is a huge continent, very big. Have you ever reflected on the fact that within Africa, you can fit in the United States of America, you can fit in China, you can fit in India, you can fit in Western Europe, and there'll still be space for Japan and a few other countries. That's literally how big we are. Never mind the maps, just the scale, the size of our continent. But the maps are done in such a way that they reflect other things more than just the actual mass of our continent. Now, if you look at the world, most countries have almost exhausted their arable land. But Africa still has most of the reserves of arable land, around 60%. But it's going to be very important how we deal with this, because we need to increase our production on what is under cultivation. We need to put more under cultivation, but we need to process what we produce. We need to be able to distribute it within the continent and export outside the continent. So it must be part of our industrialization strategy. But we must also be careful, because everybody is looking at this land. And already, some of them are coming and buying big tracts of land with very long leases. And okay, that may be fine, but what they grow, they want to take lock, stock and barrel out to their countries. We can't allow that. What they produce, we must find a way of it being processed in our countries, because that's where we need jobs. Now, if these big tracts of land are only producing agricultural labor, those are the only jobs we are going to create of those who grow. And beyond that, the other jobs are created in other countries. We will never get to this prosperity we're talking about. So, if they make use of our land, fine. Let's say to our governments and our business people, let's process what they produce here and then take the finished product out. But also, if we need what they produce, we must also have access to it. We must also have access to it. If they produce something that we also need, we must also have access to it. But because they come to us one by one, and we are not aware of what's happening elsewhere, we are going to end up in a serious problem. So I think early enough, we must deal with this issue. We're not saying they mustn't come and invest, but they must invest, not do something else, which I will not name right now. So we think agriculture. Then, of course, we have lots of mineral resources and natural resources. Again, we should utilize them for the good and for the good of the people, the young people, the women. Our people must benefit. Then we can get to this point of prosperity. Of course, we'll continue working on peace and security, governance, all those issues is fine. But we must have drivers for this prosperity and peace. And the other area which we need to unlock is infrastructure. When we build infrastructure, of course, it's also a driver for economic growth, but it's also a binding constraint if it's not there. So energy, we are generating energy in sub-Saharan Africa equivalent to the energy generated in Spain in one country. All of us in sub-Saharan Africa. Now that must tell us that we are not going to get to prosperity unless we generate more energy. If you take the population of Spain and the population of sub-Saharan Africa, we're probably 20 times more than they are, but we are producing enough same amount of energy. And half of that energy is in one country, actually. Half of what we're generating is in one country, in South Africa. So we must generate much more. And because we are going to be generating much more now, we must also make use of technologies that exist now. We must use the old methods where it's not possible to use new ones, but we must also use new ones. We must get technology, the sun, for instance, the wind, thermal. We must have all those mixtures. But transport infrastructure is also a big problem. Somebody was saying they were trying to, I think somebody from Ghana actually, was saying to import rice from one part of Ghana to the other is much more expensive than just getting it from Thailand. And it's because of in large measure, because of the transport. So we need to sort out the transport infrastructure, both road, rail, and for me, when we're talking infrastructure, we must also look at what is there out there in the market, modern. Because part of what we should do is to modernize. We can't start where the Industrial Revolution started. We must start where people are now. Why is it that we can't think of our grandchildren going on a speed train from the Gambia to here? Why not? Why can't our grandchildren move from South Africa on a speed train to Dakar? Let's think big and put our minds to it. For me, we should think big. We should think of infrastructure that would link all of us. But it's not just about linking all of us. It's about moving people and goods across the continent. But also India, China, by 2025 or 2020, will be sending, between them, they'll be sending more than 300 million tourists to the world. And if that's what is going to happen, what proportion is going to come to us? And what proportion will come to us will be determined by the infrastructure we have for them to move around. And if we don't have that infrastructure, they'll go to other continents. They won't come to us. And yet, we also have so much to offer because the continent is not only large, it's beautiful, it's got every type of tourist interest. But we need to be able to move. So these are just some of the ideas. Water infrastructure, of course, is very important. And also we need to think creatively about mobilizing resources, including alternate sources of resources, so that we can continue to fund our infrastructure, but fund it at a larger scale and at a faster rate. So, of course, from our side, we need to strengthen this institution, but we need to make it an institution not only for governments, but it must also be driven by its citizens. And I just want to end by a quote. Of course, all these areas I've mentioned, women must be there. They must be in agriculture in a big way. They must have access to land. They must have access to capital. They must have access to implements and technology. In every aspect, women and youth must be there. So if I haven't mentioned it, it doesn't mean that it's because I don't think they should. In business, they should be there. In leadership, political leadership, they should be there. As they are starting to be there, but not enough. They'll be enough when we don't sit and say, oh, we've got president of Malawi, we've got president of Liberia, we have vice president here, and we can still count them in our fingers. They'll be enough when there are as many as nobody counts men, that there's a male president there, a male president there. Business people, they will be enough when we can no longer count them. As long as we count them, yes, it's progress, but far from being enough. Let me just end by a quote from president of Burkina, one of the late presidents of Burkina, Thomas Sankara.